She said it so casually, like she was suggesting we grab coffee. One night, no strings. We go back to pretending this never happened by Monday morning. I stared at Isla Vance across that dimly lit hotel bar, the hum of the city 32 floors below us, and thought, this woman has been the bane of my existence for 2 years. And somehow she's still the most compelling person in any room she walks into. I should have said no. I should have finished my bourbon, gone back to my room, and spent the rest of the legal conference being professionally hostile toward her the way we always were. That was the arrangement we'd had. That was the arrangement that made sense. Instead, I said, define no strings. And she smiled, not the sharp courtroom smile she used to make opposing counsel sweat, but something quieter than that. Something that made me realize I'd never actually seen her smile like that before. I'm a litigator at Caldwell and Marsh in Chicago. Civil disputes, mostly, commercial contracts, partnership dissolutions, the kind of cases that end careers and occasionally friendships. I'd been with the firm for 4 years when Isla Vance showed up. She came from a boutique firm in D.C., Harrington Associates, which had a reputation for being ruthless in the way that only firms with 3 names and no founding partners still alive can be. She brought 2 major clients with her, a corner office they cleared out in 48 hours, and a way of moving through a room that made it feel like everyone else was just furniture. I noticed her immediately. I want to be honest about that. The first time we were in a meeting together, a partner briefing on a pharmaceutical dispute, she disagreed with my read on a key precedent. Didn't hedge it, didn't soften it. Just said, that's the wrong case. The Morrow decision is cleaner and it actually holds. And then cited it from memory, page, and paragraph. She was right. That was the worst part. I spent the drive home that night, convincing myself she was arrogant, that her confidence was performance, that the DC polish was just a costume over the same cutthroat ambition we all had, and she just wore it more expensively. But then it kept happening. She was right about the Halverson filing. She was right about the deposition strategy on the Carver case. She was right about the judge's bias in a bench trial that I'd been certain we'd win, and we didn't. And she didn't say a word about it afterward, which was somehow worse than if she had. We fell into a rhythm that I think outsiders would have called rivalry. But that felt, from the inside, more like 2 people who couldn't stop watching each other. We competed for the same cases. We argued in hallways with the energy of people who had a lot more to say than the words they were using. We were unfailingly polite in front of clients and quietly brutal in private, the kind of brutal that's really just 2 people who respect each other too much to be gentle. Her name became shorthand in my brain for a specific kind of frustration, the kind that keeps you up at night, not because you're angry, but because you can't stop turning the conversation over, finding the places where maybe you were wrong, where maybe she had a point, where maybe. I stopped that thought every time it got there. We were colleagues, competitors. Nothing else made sense. The National Litigation Forum is held every year in October. That year it was in Nashville, a Marriott conference center with a rooftop bar and 3 days of panels about discovery reform and trial technology and the changing landscape of commercial arbitration. It's the kind of thing you go to because the firm expects it, and you drink more than you should, and you come back with 2 new contacts and a headache. I'd been there a day and a half when I ran into Isla at the hotel bar. Not ran into. That's not right. I saw her when I walked in. She was sitting at the far end of the bar with a glass of something amber. Her heels off jacket folded over the stool beside her. She looked like someone who had just finished being impressive and was now allowing herself 10 minutes of not performing it. I almost went to the other end of the bar. I didn't. Slow night? I asked, sitting down 2 stools away. The careful distance of people who have not decided yet. She glanced over. No surprise, no warmth, no hostility, just the particular neutrality she had when she was deciding what to give you. The panel on e-discovery ran 40 minutes over, she said. I need something stronger than what they were serving in there. The arbitration track. Mediation best practices. She said it the way you say something you've survived. I ordered a bourbon and settled in. The bartender disappeared. Outside, the Nashville skyline was doing its best. You're not usually at these things, Isla said. Neither are you, I asked first. Bellamy asked me to represent the firm on the ethics committee panel tomorrow. I took a drink. You? Same reason. She turned to look at me then. Direct, the way she was always direct. Are you on the panel? I am. Something shifted in her expression, amusement maybe, or the version of amusement she allowed herself. Well, she said, this should be interesting. We stayed at that bar for 2 hours. I don't know exactly when it shifted. There wasn't a moment I could point to, no line crossed, no clear before and after. It was more like the ambient temperature of the conversation changed. The sharpness that we usually used as armor went somewhere, and what was underneath was easier, more honest. The kind of talk you have with someone when you've stopped trying to win. She told me about growing up in Richmond, Virginia. Her father was a public defender for 30 years. She'd spent Saturdays in the courthouse gallery as a kid, watching him argue cases. She made it sound matter-of-fact, but I heard the love in it. I told her about my mother, who'd pushed me toward law the way only a woman who couldn't access it herself, in the era she grew up in, could push. Who'd called me on every single bar exam results day and sat on the phone with me in silence until I got the email. The bar quieted down. Someone put on a playlist that was doing its best impression of a jazz standard. Around midnight, she said without preamble, I want to ask you something, and I need you to not make it weird. I looked at her. Those are the words people say right before they make something weird. I know. She held her glass with both hands, looking at it rather than me. But I'm asking anyway. Then she said it one night, no strings. Back to normal by Monday. The room did something strange, or maybe I did. I became aware of the distance between us, 2 bar stools, which is not very far, and of the 2 years of professional distance we'd built so carefully, and of how little it seemed to matter in that specific moment, at midnight, in a hotel bar in Nashville. Define no strings, I said. She met my eyes. It means what it says. We're adults. It doesn't have to become something. You're not worried about the firm, are you? I thought about it. Honestly thought about it. Not right now, I said. Good, she said. Neither am I. I'm not going to tell you everything that happened that night. Not because I'm protecting anything, but because some things belong to the people who were there, and cheapened by the translation into words. What I'll tell you is that she was different than I'd expected. Not softer. Isla Vance is not a soft person, and I wouldn't have wanted her to be, but more present than she was at work. Less armored. She laughed at something I said around 2 in the morning, and it was a real laugh, the kind that catches you off guard, and I thought, I have been in the same building as this woman for 2 years, and I have never heard that before. I thought about that more than I wanted to. In the morning, she was the first one up, dressed and composed before I was fully awake. She set a cup of coffee on the nightstand beside me, without being asked, and said, Panel's at 9, don't be late. And then she left. I lay there for a minute staring at the ceiling. I should have felt relieved. Clean. The terms had been clear. One night, then back to the way things were. That was sensible. That was professional. That was what 2 reasonable adults in a complicated working situation agreed to. Instead, I felt something that I would spend the next 3 weeks pretending was nothing. We were good at pretending. Back in Chicago, we were exactly what we'd always been: competitive, combative, unfailingly professional in front of witnesses. If anything, we were slightly more careful with each other, a degree more formal. The particular stiffness of people who are working very hard not to reference something. I told myself it was fine, that it had been exactly what she said it was. That I was reading into the coffee on the night, which was a small thing, not a gesture, just a thing a person does. I threw myself into work. We had a major case going to trial, a contract dispute between 2 logistics companies, one of which had allegedly buried evidence of a supplier agreement that would have destroyed their position. It was the kind of case I loved. Complicated, high stakes, with a paper trail that required you to think like both a detective and a historian. Isla was not on the case, which should have made things easier. It didn't. I kept noticing her absence in meeting rooms where we'd usually both be. Kept having thoughts mid-brief that were basically, what would Isla say to this? Which was not a thought I was comfortable having because it implied I valued the answer. 3 weeks after Nashville, we ended up alone in the elevator on the way out of the building, late enough that the floors were empty, the kind of quiet that makes a building feel like it's just a building and not a place where people perform their best selves all day. You've been avoiding me, she said to the elevator doors. I've been busy. You walked the long way to the copy room twice this week. I looked at her. You noticed that? She turned to look at me, and for a second she looked almost uncertain, and Isla Vance was never uncertain, not in any room I'd ever seen her in. "I made coffee," she said, "before I left. It wasn't, I just thought." She stopped. I said, "I know. I don't know what I thought," she said, and then the elevator opened and she stepped out, and I stood there for an extra second, watching her walk toward the parking structure. I took the stairs back up to my office, sat at my desk for 10 minutes doing nothing. Then I wrote her a text that I deleted twice before I sent it. For what it's worth, it was a really good cup of coffee. 3 minutes later, "You make it sound like I did something impressive." "You did. It was 7 a.m. and you knew how I take it." A longer pause. Then, "Black, no sugar. I pay attention." I stared at my phone for longer than I should have. Here's the thing about paying attention to someone: it's not something you can do neutrally. Attention has a direction. It means something that you know, and once you know that she knows, the pretense gets harder to hold. We didn't talk about Nashville again. But the elevator happened, and the texts happened, and then a few other small things happened. A case we were both pulled into in November, where we ended up working late 3 nights running, and the particular intimacy of two people arguing about trial strategy at 11:30 at night when the building is empty and there's nothing left to perform. She'd throw something at me, a theory, an objection, and I'd push back hard, the way I always did. But now there was something underneath the argument that hadn't been there before. Something that felt less like combat and more like trust. Like we were two people who had each other's actual attention, not just the professional version. One night she fell asleep at the conference table, which was so unlike her that I just stood there for a moment. Her face was softer when she slept, less like someone carrying something. I got her coat from the rack and put it over her. When she woke up 20 minutes later, she looked at it and then at me, and I pretended to be very interested in my legal pad. "You could have woken me up," she said. "You needed 10 minutes. She was quiet for a moment. "You pay attention too," she said. "I'm a litigator," I said. "It's a job requirement." She didn't push it, but she looked at me in a way that said she knew I wasn't entirely telling the truth. The thing that broke it open didn't come from us. It came from Declan Walsh. Declan was a senior partner, 15 years at the firm, the kind of man who had a reputation for developing junior talent and who everyone agreed was generous with his time and resources. I'd considered him a mentor, loosely. We had lunch every couple of months. He'd encouraged me to pursue some of the bigger cases, had put my name forward for the ethics committee panel, the one in Nashville, as it happened. I didn't know until that December that he'd also been the one who'd made sure Isla and I were positioned as competitors rather than collaborators from her first week at the firm. I found out by accident, a billing dispute on a matter that had been reassigned. I was digging through case history, and I found an email chain between Declan and the managing partner from 2 years earlier. Right around when Isla arrived. Better to keep them separate. Two strong personalities on the same side is redundant. Let them sharpen each other. It'll improve both their billings. I read it 3 times. Let them sharpen each other. Not for the firm's benefit, not for the clients, for billings. For the optics of two high performers in visible competition, which made the department look dynamic and drew in a certain kind of client who wanted to feel like they were getting the sharpest knife in the drawer. We had been managed, not mentored. Managed the way you manage resources, not people. I thought about every meeting where Declan had seemed to fan the tension between us. Every offhand comment that framed Isla as my competition specifically, every time he'd passed information to one of us that seemed designed to make the other one look like a rival rather than a colleague. I thought about 2 years of friction that we'd both internalized as natural, as a personality clash, as just the way things were between us. My hands were still when I called her. "I'm not sure how. I need to show you something," I said. "Not at the office." She heard something in my voice. "When?" "Tonight if you can." We met at a coffee shop on Michigan Avenue, neutral ground, nothing that looked like the aftermath of anything. I showed her the email on my laptop screen, watched her read it. She was very still for a long time. "He introduced us as rivals in the first staff meeting," she said finally. "You remember that? He made a joke about keeping the peace between the two of us." "I thought it was." She stopped. "I thought it was a read of the room, that there was already tension. There wasn't. I didn't know you yet." She closed the laptop and pushed it slightly away from her, like she was creating distance from what was inside it. 2 years, she said. Yeah, we lost time, she said it quietly, like she wasn't sure she meant to say it out loud. I looked at her. What kind of time? She met my eyes. The coffee shop was busy. Saturday afternoon, people everywhere. The noise of a city doing its weekend. And she looked at me across that small table and said, "The kind you don't get back." I reached across the table and covered her hand with mine. She looked down at it. Then she turned her hand over and held on. We didn't do anything dramatic about Declan. There were no confrontations, no HR complaints, no burning of professional bridges. We weren't naive. He was a senior partner, and the email, while revealing, showed strategy more than misconduct. What we did was more deliberate than dramatic. We started collaborating, not loudly, not as a statement. We just began working together the way two people who actually trusted each other would. And it turned out that what Declan had assumed would be redundant was actually something else entirely. We had different instincts, different reads on the same facts. When we argued about strategy, we argued better than either of us argued alone. The logistics case, the one I'd been carrying solo, we brought her in as co-counsel for the trial phase. We won. The client was so satisfied they retained us for 3 additional matters. Declan noticed. He said something at a partners meeting about synergy, about playing to strengths, like it was his idea. Neither of us said anything. Afterward, in the hallway, Isla caught my eye, and there was something in her expression that was as close to mischief as I'd ever seen from her. This tiny, precise amusement. Like we had a private language now. Like we had always been on the same side and were only just living in that truth. We were careful about the transition. Careful in the way people are when they've both been burned before, not by each other, but by the general experience of having been certain about something and then being wrong. She said once, over dinner, we were going to dinner by then, the kind with no professional cover story, "I need you to know that Nashville wasn't calculation." I looked at her. I know that. I don't know if you do. I need to say it. She was looking at me directly, the way she always did when she was being completely honest. I've thought about you for longer than I admitted to myself. What I said that night, the terms, that was me trying to have the thing while protecting myself from wanting more of it. I was quiet for a second. How'd that work out? She almost smiled. Good, I said same. She reached across the table and flicked my hand. You're unbearable. You love it. The smile came all the way out then, and I thought, there it is. There's the one I've been counting. I'm not someone who believes that everything happens for a reason. That feels like a way of letting the architects of our difficulties off the hook. Declan Walsh made a choice that cost us 2 years of what might have been something good, and no amount of narrative tidiness makes that okay. But I do believe that what you build in the wrong conditions can still be worth something. That friction, even manufactured friction, reveals things about people. How they handle being challenged. What they're like when they lose. What they fight for and why. I know more about Isla than I would if someone had just introduced us at a firm dinner and everything had been easy. I know how she argues when she's wrong and won't admit it yet. I know how she sounds when she's working through something hard and needs a room to think out loud in. I know she makes coffee at 7 a.m. in a strange hotel room for someone who didn't ask and doesn't make anything of it. I know she says exactly what she means, and what she means is almost always more than she says. I know that when she decides to hold your hand, she holds on. We had lunch with her father when he came through Chicago in February. He was exactly what I'd expected from her stories. Sharp, quiet, with the particular warmth of someone who has spent a long time listening to people on the worst days of their lives and still believes in them. He asked me questions about my work. Listened to the answers. At the end of lunch, when she'd stepped away, he looked at me and said, "She talks about you differently than she talks about other people." Differently how? I asked. Like you're someone she's decided to be honest with. He said it simply, like it wasn't a big statement. For her, that's the whole thing. I thought about that the whole drive back. There's a version of this story that's about rivalry and tension and a single night in Nashville. That's the version that sounds like something. But the actual story is quieter and stranger than that. It's about two people who were positioned against each other from the start and spent 2 years mistaking what they were actually feeling. It's about a cup of coffee that meant something even before either of us was ready to say what. It's about what happens when you stop performing competition and start just being in the same room. We're still at Caldwell and Marsh. We still argue, sometimes fiercely, in ways that make associates nervous. Our instincts are different enough that we push each other, and neither of us has any interest in pretending otherwise. I think that's part of it, that we don't need the friction to be manufactured because the real kind, the productive kind, was always there. What wasn't there was the trust, the willingness to be on the same side. That's the thing Declan miscalculated. He thought our competition was the asset. He didn't see that what we'd actually be capable of was the collaboration. He was optimizing for the performance of two sharp people at odds, and he missed that the underlying material was something you could build with. We built with it anyway, just later than we should have. Last week, she came into my office with a case file and dropped it on my desk and said, "Tell me I'm wrong about the jurisdiction issue," and sat down across from me like she owned the room. Which, honestly, she kind of does. And we argued about it for 40 minutes, and I was right, and she admitted it. And then she said, "Okay, but my read on the damages theory is better." And it was, and I told her so, and she looked faintly pleased in the way she does when she's trying not to look faintly pleased. When she left, I sat there for a moment just present, not thinking about the next thing, just in the room where I was. Some things take longer than they should. Some things arrive anyway. She knew how I took my coffee before I told her. That's still the detail I come back to. That was the whole thing, really. She'd been paying attention all along.